As I started to have feelings, as I hit puberty and into high school and beyond, these attractions, I never really gave them a lot of heed because I thought, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Because I can get married and have a family and be happy like anybody else. In high school, I dated a lot. Didn't really have strong romantic or sexual interest in women, but I always thought my focus is my mission. So same thing into college, went to college for a year, went on my mission, great experience, and it wasn't until then when all of a sudden dating has a purpose that it all hit the wall. And I dated several girls that were the kind of people that I would want to marry. And I just kept hitting a wall. There was nothing in me that really wanted to have any kind of a romantic or intimate relationship with any of these women. I found myself having those kinds of feelings for men, and there was resonance of those feelings back in high school, but it just wasn't on the radar. It wasn't something that I was willing to address or that I felt like I really even needed to address. But now it was something that was becoming a huge block in my forward progression. I hit a kind of a crisis point when I was teaching at the MTC, and I was in a place where I felt like I was more attuned to the Spirit than at any point I'd ever been, even more so than my mission. On my mission, I felt like I learned how to be obedient, but it was after my mission that I feel like I learned how to really tune into the Spirit of God. As I had this kind of spiritual crisis, I decided at that point I needed to talk to somebody, so I went and talked to my bishop. I didn't really have anything to confess. I hadn't done anything. I just didn't know where I felt stuck and afraid and discouraged and kind of hopeless. And so he recommended a counselor. I was at BYU at the time, and so I met. I started seeing a counselor there, but there was no one that I felt like I could look to that was doing what I wanted to do, and that was to be able to reconcile these feelings, to come to a place of resolution, and to find a hopeful and happy place in the church, whatever that looked like. Nobody. And that was a long journey, and there was a time where I felt like maybe this isn't even possible, and feeling very hopeless. And to the point where I thought, at one point I saw myself on my way out of the church, because people who were happy, or at least who acted happy, weren't doing this inside the church. At that point, I started dating guys. I felt like that was the only way for me to figure out, like, is this something that I wanted? And I was very cautious and very careful in that. I didn't want to jump into anything or do too quickly or do anything that I would really regret. But I started to explore that world. I was in a couple different relationships with people that I really cared about, and it was interesting because I felt more emotionally alive, but I also felt a loss of light, and that was clear to me during that time. And it was a slow decrease in light, but I noticed it. At one point, I was feeling very distant, probably as far from God as I'd ever felt, and I had this very strong spiritual experience, kind of a mystical experience, where it was almost being enveloped in this feeling of love. There was nothing in that was like, what you're doing is right, what you're doing is wrong. It was just this feeling of, I love you. And I felt like God knew me, that He remembered me, and I needed that more than anything. And again, it wasn't an affirmation, it wasn't a rebuke, it was just, I love you. And so I continued just trying to moving forward to find reconciliation, to be in places. I kept attending church, and just to try to be in places where I thought the Spirit could be present to teach me. I kept trying to learn and read, and I kept trying to figure things out. And at one point, I was in a kind of a devotional address, and the instructor was talking about Isaiah. But if you take hold of the covenant, you shall have a place and a name better than that of sons and of daughters. And as he was talking about this verse, I just had, again, like this really powerful spiritual experience that my place was in the church. That's where I needed to be. It was a very clear communication that whether you get married in this life or the next is of no matter. Just stay with me. Stay with me. If you take life a day at a time, continuing to seek and to cultivate the Spirit in your life, every blessing that can be had will be yours. Just trust. That's what I did. And at that point, I resolved myself that I was going to get my life back in order. And I was able to totally release myself from cultural expectation. Like from now on, I was doing this journey in the church, but this was between me and God. No more pressure to get married, no more timetables, no more anything. No more programs, it was this or that therapy. It was me and God. I'm taking this at a day at a time. If something works, great. If it doesn't, great. Not a problem. I'm with God, and that's all that I need. But that was enough for me to be able to feel a real hope and to feel a joy in Christ and to feel a joy in the gospel that I had lost years before. And also the natural desire to want to have companionship. But at this point I knew I didn't need that more than I needed God. It was God first, that was second. And it was a slow process over several years. I don't know that I ever really started to feel a sense of like changing from homosexual to heterosexual as much as I just felt like the feelings didn't have they didn't have any control or power. They didn't have the pull in my life that they had once had. And I went from thinking I probably won't marry in this life, and really believing that I probably wouldn't, to feeling like I think I will marry in this life, but it'll be later rather than sooner, to thinking I will marry and it'll be sooner rather than later. But this is over a process of like 7 years. So this is a long time of just taking life a day at a time, trying to stay close to the Spirit, letting the Lord guide me as to that next step. So I decided that I wanted to pray and ask God if marriage was in the cards for me. And I was okay with not receiving an answer, but I thought, the surest way not to receive an answer is to not ask. Shortly after I had this prayer, there was no immediate answer. I reconnected with my now wife.
When Ty and I first started dating, thinking about who he was as a human being and what that could mean for us together eternally really opened my mind to having a relationship with him. But then beyond that, it's also important in this life to be happy. And we were able to, figure out what did that mean for us and how does that affect our relationship, or how doesn't it affect our relationship? And we worked out the temporal as well, but I think having that eternal perspective was a very important thing for us to even start down this path.
It was a date at a time and a day at a time. And everything about it just felt so right. And I felt like I was kind of riding this spiritual wave. And the memory, of that prayer kept coming back to me, and that this blessing was coming because I was both seeking and being open to taking the steps of faith. As President Packer has said, those steps into the darkness, only to find that the way is still lit for a step or two. We ended up getting married, and it's been beautiful since then. And we now have a little boy who is the joy of both of our lives. And I have this family that I never felt like would come, but only came because ultimately that spiritual experience that it's okay to just take life a step at a time. Just stay with me. It'll come whenever it comes, but just stay with me. And I express gratitude always to the Lord for that divine communication, which really transformed my approach to this issue, which has ultimately led me to where I'm at today.